Good evening. I'm Matthew Dowd, sitting in for Charlie Rose, who's on assignment today. President Obama will deliver his final State of the Union on Tuesday. The president is expected to touch on three themes: the economy, national security, and civic participation. His chief of staff, Dennis McDonough, said that the speech would provide a contrast with what he called the doom and gloom of the leading contenders in the Republican presidential race. Meanwhile, the GOP race in Iowa remains close as Donald Trump and Ted Cruz are running neck and neck. Marco Rubio is in third. Trump has also built a 16-point lead in New Hampshire. The Iowa caucuses will take place in 3 weeks. Joining me now from Washington is Bloomberg View's Al Hunt. Here in New York, Frank Luntz, a political communications consultant and founder of Luntz Global Partners, also Tavis Smiley. He is the host of Tavis Smiley on PBS. His latest book is The Covenant with Black America, 10 Years Later. Welcome. Al, let me start with you. State of the Union tomorrow night. I'd like to sort of do a round. What do you think the State of the Union is for most Americans who will be tuning in for that speech tomorrow?
Well, it's a lot better than it was 7 years ago or 3 or 4 years ago in reality, but I'm not sure the perception is that much different, Matthew. I think people feel this has been a very uneven recovery. It's been actually quite a pronounced recovery. We're at 5% unemployment. That's half of what it was only about 6.5 years ago. But I'm not quite sure that feeling is as pervasive as one might suspect it should be.
Frank, what do you think the majority of Americans think the State of the Union is?
When you ask them the question, are America's best years ahead or behind, for the first time, a majority now say that our best years are behind us. Is America headed in the right direction or off on the wrong track? They say wrong track by 65%. On all the statistics, Al's right. The numbers are positive for more Americans, but the perception is so dark and so depressing that if you go out and speak to Americans all across the country, what they tell you is they've been betrayed by Washington, broken promises by corporate America, and they just feel that no one's on their side.
So do you think, before I get Tavis's view, do you think the response to that the Republicans are saying the doom and gloom is more in touch with where America is, or the president's probable presentation of some optimism, it's closer?
They're both wrong, because and which is why the public's so frustrated with them. Frankly, the Republicans have to offer a more positive, a more hopeful approach. It is perfectly acceptable to talk about how things just haven't been the way that Americans expected them to be. But if you don't give them a path to a better future, then the public has every right to reject them.
Tavis, your new book, The Covenant with Black America, a big part of that is the sense that nothing has changed, or in some cases it may be worse. Where do you think the majority of the country stands?
It depends on who you ask. I wouldn't disagree that is with much of what Al or Frank have said, but it depends on who you ask. If you ask the 1%, they're doing better. If you ask folk down the street here on Wall Street, they're doing better. If you ask the Hispanic community, some progress, not enough. If you ask black folk, based on the data in this text, it's sad to say, and it pains me to actually say this every time I have to come to this, Matthew, but black America has lost ground in every leading economic category over the last 10 years. This book first came out in 2006, Frank. 2016, 10-year anniversary of this text. I wanted to see where are we on what these top 10 issues were to African Americans 10 years ago. When you've lost ground in every major economic category over 10 years, and clearly the book is out before Obama in 2006, so it wasn't about him then. It's not so much about him now. It's about the state of this community. And for black people, when you're losing that fast, that's not a good picture.
So a follow up on that, not to go off on it, but the president historical election in 2008, first African-American president in the country. And if you look to that, if African-Americans are turning into that audience, or anybody turning into that audience, and you say what you say is true, they feel like, wow, I elected this person that's going to have historical change, and nothing's changed. Is that problematic for them?
I think that, I was having a conversation about this the other day. It's a brilliant question. I think that ultimately the historians are going to root for Obama. I've been thinking, as I've been working on this book, what are the historians going to say about this moment? Because where black folk are concerned, you have to juxtapose two things, that in the era of the first black president, the bottom fell out for black America. In many ways, although they had a black president, they were still politically marginalized. economically exploited. They were socially manipulated. So how do you juxtapose those two realities years from now? I'm glad I'm not a historian trying to figure that out 20, 40, 50 years down the road. But I tell you this, I think the historians are going to root for Obama ultimately because it's a good American story. You got to say America did the right thing. They elected the brother. You know, so the story, the narrative kind of takes its own shape. But when they get to this part about how you juxtapose those two realities, his success and the bottoming out for black America, that's going to be a much harder story to tell.
And here's what's amazing statistically. The most optimistic people in America
absolutely
are African Americans.
That's right.
And because they're excited, they're still excited about this president. They still defend him, no matter what has happened to them economically.
That attitude changes dramatically as soon as a Republican is elected? Do you think they become less optimistic as soon as a Republican is elected?
So much of America was proud back in 2008 when Barack Obama got elected. It wasn't just black America. It was all of America. Even if you didn't vote for him, millions of Americans were glad to see that this country could make that step. What's fascinating to me that the community is suffering economically, and it is widespread suffering, and yet they still believe that tomorrow is going to be better than today.
One of the things that just absolutely struck me looking at election returns in 14 and in Louisiana last year is that African Americans now vote. They vote in just as heavy numbers as whites, which was not the case pre-Obama. So I don't disagree with anything that Tavis said about their general situation, but I think maybe this reflects the optimism that Frank just alluded to, but it really was remarkable that there was a there was a very good African-American turnout in Louisiana and Georgia and 14, North Carolina. I think that may become a permanent condition.
Al, so turning to the State of the Union, you've seen a lot of these State of the Unions. Not to put an age on you, but you've seen quite a few.
McKinley.
Yeah, delivered in paper form, or whatever form he did, not on television. This is an interesting context for this president's State of the Union, is that I think from a couple of perspectives. Okay, so we've had over the last 40 years, only a few presidents elected in 2 consecutive terms, right? So we had President Bush, who arrived at his last State of the Union, very bad numbers, very bad perception of the country when he walked in. Bill Clinton reversed. Bill Clinton was doing well on his final State of the Union, a different way to address the country, and Ronald Reagan doing well on his final State of the Union as he walked into the State of the Union. Do these State of the Union, now we're also in the context of he's giving in the State of the Union in a very heated political race where his former Secretary of State is the dominant candidate on the Democratic side. How much, if any, do these State of the Unions or this State of the Union will matter in the course of the president's legacy and the politics we're about to face?
Well, not much for the latter, I think, Matt, but I think, interestingly, all 3 of those previous 2-term presidents that you just cited faced the same situation. The 2 of them had their vice president running then. I think the final year State of the Union, whether it was Reagan or Bush or Clinton, and tomorrow I expect Obama, is about their legacy. That's why, in part, he's got to be upbeat. He's got to be can-do. He's got to say, here's the incredible things that America has accomplished for all of our problems. There will be a laundry list of sorts. There'll be some legislative requests, and he actually might get a few. But by and large, the 8th year is about their legacy, and in that context, I think it'll be very similar in theme and tone to Bush, Reagan, and Clinton.
Tavis, when I listen to the criticism of this president from the Republican side, I get 2 completely opposing criticisms. The first criticism is he hasn't been a leader, he hasn't done anything, America's lost, we haven't accomplished anything. That's one thing, so they criticize him there. And then the opposite criticism is this president is a crazy ideologue, he's done all of these crazy things, we weren't able to stop him, he's done all these crazy... Where is the president in that?
I think the truth is typically somewhere in the middle. And again, it depends on what your laundry list is that you're judging him by. There's no doubt about the fact. And I think here again is where the historians are going to judge him not so harshly. He said, you know, he keeps the economy from going into a Great Depression, clearly a Great Recession, which wiped out all the black wealth. But we're in a recession, at least not in a depression. We're going to debate this climate change thing for years to come. We'll debate the Iran nuclear agreement. But by and large, the president got some things done, more, quite frankly, than I thought he was going to get done in the second term, certainly, Frank. But I think think that the obstructionism, though, is a very real issue. And so for anyone on the right to declare him, to declare that he didn't get anything done. If you believe he didn't get anything done, he didn't get anything done because you blocked everything that he tried to do. And if he got anything done, he did it around you. So I don't buy that argument on either side, quite frankly.
So, Frank, let me ask you something. So today, when the president stands up there tomorrow, 2/3 of the country thinks we're on the wrong track. But if you take a look at the president's accomplishments, right? Unemployment's at 5%. Millions of jobs have been added over the course of his presidency. The American auto industry was saved. They had the highest sales that were announced in the last week in the history of the country. He got Osama bin Laden, but it doesn't seem to be reflected at all in the perception of the American public.
I want to step slightly out of tomorrow's speech because you have to look at where he could have been. If you go back to 2008, 2009, he could have ushered in a period of post-partisanship, and he chose not to. He could have brought in Republicans and not allowed Nancy Pelosi to basically say it's our way or the highway. He had that brief opportunity to do it, and he chose not to. And by the way, I don't blame him. I actually blame former Speaker Pelosi for that. And so I saw an opportunity, one brief moment, when he could have changed the entire political system, and he chose not to. And so that was a missed opportunity. And second, yes, the Congress has been absolutely opposed to him because in the end, his signature legislation, health care, only 38% supported it on the day that it was passed. You had a clear majority who was against it. So here he is trying to promote legislation that the American people said, please, Mr. President, don't. He was right to focus on the issue, but his approach was wrong, and the legislation was wrong, and still a majority of Americans oppose it.
I disagree with Matt Dowd once in my life, and now once with you. Only once with you. I don't buy the first part of your argument, in part because I think the story's a little bit different. To my mind, President Obama, certainly in the first term, was a bit too deferential to Republicans. I could give you a laundry list just as long or longer than the one you just laid out of things where he let them run the table on these issues. The only reason why the health care thing even exists, and you're right about this about Pelosi, is because the president of the White House is about to throw the towel in on that. Pelosi goes to the White House and demands, oh, no. We've worked too hard to get this thing passed. We're going to make this thing happen one way or the other. Yeah, but in too many ways, he's been too deferential to Republicans.
When this country works best is when the president works with Congress, as Gingrich and Bill Clinton proved, and they had tremendous public support, which is what allowed Bill Clinton to win re-election in 1996 and the Republicans to keep the House and Senate, because they were doing the public's business.
The key component is, though,
Matthew, I have to weigh in.
I want to bring
Matthew, I really want to weigh in. The Clinton-Gingrich thing, Frank Luntz knows, is largely a myth. Clinton rolled Newt Gingrich every chance he got. That's why they got things done, because Gingrich capitulated. And I'm sorry, Frank, basically a president is not supposed to turn his back on a strong leader. And you may not like Nancy Pelosi, but she's a very strong speaker, stronger than any speaker probably in our lifetime, or at least since Sam Rayburn. And that's what legislative leaders do.
Do you think he makes a mistake tomorrow night to try to point fingers, or do you think he his rhetoric rises above?
I don't think he points fingers. I think he rises above it. This is legacy time now. So I think he's going to definitely, if he's smart, he'll rise above it. But the debate's going to be about why didn't he get more done? Here again, did he not try hard enough, or was he obstructed? And to Frank's point, the reason why you can't work with somebody who doesn't want to work with you. On the first day of your inauguration, when the leader in the Senate, the minority leader says our job is to defeat him, I mean, come on. How do you get something done if they don't want to work with you? And Obama was up against that most of his two terms.
So, Al, I want to turn now to something that's probably not as soaring as we expect the president's speech to be, to the Republican primary race for president. Where are we on this race, you think?
You know, Matthew, I never thought I would say this 2 or 3 months ago, but I find it almost impossible to see a scenario where an establishment Republican can get the nomination. And I have a broad definition of establishment Republicans. I think it's down in Iowa, certainly, to a two-way race. It's Cruz and Trump. And I think the battle for the nomination may well reflect the same.
Frank, you see it that way?
I wish I didn't have to see it at all. The anger that is felt by about 60% of the electorate on the Republican side is palpable. And you hear it even before my focus groups begin. And in fact, I think you should look at it not as left-right or establishment outsider, but tonal. Are you angry, or are you acquiescent, and 70% of the GOP primary electorate is angry, and so they're voting for Trump and Cruz and Chris Christie. Or you can have the acquiescence, which is basically a Rubio to some point, but a Jeb Bush or a Ben Carson, that there's a more gentle approach. And we've now reached the point where if you don't yell in politics, people don't hear you.
With all of that, if you had to take your family's money and put it on the table and say, I'm going to bet it on this person winning the nomination, who's that?
Well, clearly we shouldn't be endorsing gambling since young people do watch this show. I believe that Ted Cruz wins in Iowa. I believe that Donald Trump wins in New Hampshire and South Carolina. And if you force me to bet right now, I've never said this on television, but if you force me to bet right now, I would say Trump has the advantage, a narrow advantage over Ted Cruz. But you still got to watch Rubio. And you still have to watch Chris Christie.
None of what Al calls the establishment candidates you put on that list or the acquiescent candidates that you put.
No, because they're so outnumbered and so outshouted that it's depressing.
I can't talk. After Frank's last comment, I'm about to go into full cardiac arrest. I'm about to have a Fred Sanford moment. Please say it ain't so. I think that ultimately it doesn't matter. I'm going to say something I haven't said on TV since Frank stepped out. I'll step out. I don't think it matters either way. Because in the end, whether it's Cruz or Trump, I don't think you can get there from here. That is to say, in the most multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic America, that dog just won't hunt. What Trump is selling, ain't nobody going to buy it, writ large. What Cruz is selling is not going to be bought writ large. And in the end, it's not going to sell to the majority of the American people. Bill Clinton famously said elections are about the future, not about the past. And I just don't see how that message sells about a brighter future for America. So in the end, I don't think it matters.
But there's one problem, which is the opponent will be Hillary Clinton, regardless of that Bernie Sanders wins Iowa and wins New Hampshire. I think he's going to win both of them. She's going to be the opponent.
Do you think when he does that, which I think probably is true as of today, does it extend their process much longer?
Yes.
So it hurts her in the process.
She's already got, we're pollsters. Only 29% of Americans think that she has the honesty and integrity to be president. We've never had anyone even close to those numbers. How do you elect someone, or how are you so sure that that person wins, when less than 1 out of 3 voters, and only half of your own party, thinks that she has the honesty and integrity to win?
Because if Trump or Cruz is the nominee, you're going to scare the Hades out of everybody else, and they're going to show up in huge numbers to make sure he doesn't win.
Now, that's what I was going to bring you on. I think that this is something, the Jesse Helms theory of winning elections, right, is that it doesn't matter what my numbers are, as long as I make the other person's numbers worse than my numbers, I win. Do you think Hillary Clinton's folks are sitting there begging that Donald Trump or Ted Cruz win the nomination?
They are, Matthew, without question. Now, there's a danger in that. I remember, this is before most of you were born, but back in 1966, California Republicans, Democrats rather, prayed for Ronald Reagan. They wanted to run against him rather than the mayor of San Francisco. They got their wish, and they've been suffering ever since. Let me just make one side observation about the Republicans. I think the danger for the Republican Party, particularly if it is a Trump or a Cruz and they lose the election, is does it totally change the party? Does this party become the anti-immigration party, the anti-trade party? And I think that's a real danger for Republicans. If that's the case, there is going to be a new party or a split of some sort. Hillary Clinton, I agree with Frank, is a very weak candidate. I'm less impressed by the only 29% give her a high marks on honesty. I was around when Richard Nixon was elected twice. But I do think that she has problems with all kinds of different constituencies. In our latest poll, only 35% of young people have a favorable view towards Hillary Clinton. Obama got 60% of those votes. That's a problem. And I think her greatest hope right now is that she will run against a very weak Republican candidate. That's usually not a good strategy.
Tavis, I was going to ask you that. So the description of this likelihood environment basically means we're going to nominate, the two parties are going to nominate candidates that are both disliked and distrusted at huge levels and who are on their own are unelectable. Hillary Clinton's on her own and Donald Trump or Ted Cruz on his own. That's a choice the American public is going to be faced with, which isn't a happy choice.
No, it's not a happy choice. So ultimately what we're going to have to decide then when we go to the polls is what kind of nation do we want to be? What kind of people do we want to be? That's for the country writ large. And for Republicans, they're going to have to figure out who they want to be when they grow up, and what they're going to stand for when they grow up. And again, I think Republicans can win still these, down elections, Frank, but I just don't see the country at this point turning in that direction. I don't see someone who's attacking people on race and attacking people on religion, and you can't expand your party if you're going to be the anti-immigrant party. I mean, so I just don't see the numbers. I don't see how you win.
But you raised the best point of all. Republicans have a majority in the Senate.
Yeah.
They have the biggest majority in the House that they've had since 1928, which I think was Al's first campaign. They've got more governors now than at any time in modern times. They've got more state legislatures and legislators than any time. Republicans have been winning everything except for the White House.
A year and a week from now is the inauguration of the next president. Who takes the oath?
Well, I will be living in New Zealand at that point, so I won't care. I mean, this really is the ultimate. I know we're on public television and some sort of network. It's the screw you election. I don't know who takes the oath, but in listening to Tavis and listening to Al, I know that half of Americans will feel that the president is unacceptable to them. And I'm so afraid of where this country will be 1 year from today, because I think however divided it is going to be much worse. They will use advertising, they will use social media, they will use everything possible, both sides, to drive home this message that the other side is evil. And we can't fix that. We have so poisoned the mindset of the public right now that even the best doctors could not save us.
Well, Al, with that optimistic note, I'm going to go to you. It's the way I don't want Frank to kill himself or take medicine that he should be taking. A year and a week from now, who takes the oath of office?
Oh, if I had to bet now, I'd say Hillary Clinton, but we've been so wrong for the past year that there's no reason to think that there won't be some intervening events that may totally shake up the dynamics. I do think that Democratic race will go on for a long time. It's not going to be over early. I think you're right that Bernie may well win both. He's certainly going to win one of those first two. Even if he doesn't, the race is going to go on. And I think the one confident prediction I'll make, unlike Frank Luntz, I'll go out on a limb and say there'll be things that none of us imagine today are going to occur over the next 6 months.
Tavis?
I agree with Al on that last comment, certainly, and I agree with Frank on his assessment that it's going to be divided either way. I was just sitting there thinking, as we move closer to the King holiday every year, King once said that cowardice asks, is it safe? Expediency asks, is it politic? Vanity asks, is it popular? But conscience asks, is it right? And sometimes we must take positions that are either safe, politic, comfortable, or convenient, but we do it because our conscience tells us that it's right. I'm going to hope and believe that the conscience of America is going to be pricked in this election cycle and that they're not going to pick a leader who's going to take this country backwards. America has always been about flowering and flourishing and expanding hope and opportunity for others. And if that's the message that the Democratic candidate delivers, the Democratic candidate, I think, wins.
And it's up to us to make that happen. Then we have to communicate a more positive future.
I agree.
Thanks, Frank. Thanks, Tavis.
Thank you,
and thanks, Al, for joining us. And we look forward to the next 100 years of your coverage. And don't forget the covenant with Black America.